Well, before I begin, I want to respectfully acknowledge that we gather here in Toronto today and are meeting on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. Welcome to the IPC's Privacy Day in recognition of Data Privacy Week 2024. Today's theme is modern government, artificial intelligence in the public sector. I want to extend a special welcome to my federal, provincial, and territorial colleagues who are joining us online from across the country. I want to also welcome our special guests here in person, including several members of our Strategic Advisory Council, Chief Commissioner of the Ontario Human Rights Commission, Council of the Law Commission of Ontario, CEOs of Ontario Health and Ontario MD, Clerk and Deputy Clerk of the City of Toronto, former CEO of the iconic Canadian company BlackBerry, and several provincial ADMs who are joining us in the room and online. I also want to extend a very warm welcome to our 6 esteemed panelists, whom you will have the pleasure of meeting in just a few moments. I'm thrilled to say that there are over 2,000 people joining us online today, which is a testament to just how important and timely this topic is. Today's proceedings are being simultaneously translated into French. Alors, bienvenue à nos participants francophones. Ça nous fait énormément plaisir de vous accueillir parmi nous aujourd'hui. Today's webcast will also be posted on our YouTube channel for future viewing as well. I want to thank my staff for their tremendous work in pulling this event together, with a particular shout out to Andrea Corlett and Jason Papadimos, who led the charge. So, today's theme is directly related to one of my office's 4 strategic priorities, namely privacy and transparency in a modern government. Our goal in this priority area is to advance Ontarians' privacy and access rights by working with public institutions to develop bedrock principles and governance frameworks for the responsible and accountable deployment of digital technologies, including AI. Artificial intelligence is the song that's got the whole world singing. It ushers in tremendous opportunities with real-world impacts unfolding in real time. It also impacts almost every aspect of our lives, for good or for ill, including our jobs and our economy, our health and safety, our ideas and creativity, our sense of truth and non-truth, our human dignity and human rights, including privacy. Our particular focus today will be on the use of AI in Ontario's public sector to fast-track the delivery of government services, make better decisions, improve engagement with residents, and solve complex societal problems. Our expert panel will guide us through the intricacies of AI, its risks and opportunities, and the privacy implications we must keep in mind as we navigate this new technological frontier. At the beginning of this decade, artificial intelligence, for many of us, still belonged to the realm of academics, a small niche of engineers and tech enthusiasts and science fiction writers. But 2023 marked the year that AI went mainstream, in large part due to the rising popularity of ChatGPT, an AI-powered language tool that anyone can use anytime for free. As AI becomes more widespread through mass appeal and adoption, the public and policymakers have grown increasingly sensitized to its benefits and its perils. In terms of benefits, AI offers seemingly endless possibilities for the public sector. AI could potentially remove language barriers for people trying to access emergency services. For example, 911 calls are being powered by AI to improve communication for residents who speak languages other than English. Callers can speak in their native language, which an AI system detects and then translates in real time for call center employees. Conversely, when the employee responds in English, the system translates it and delivers it instantaneously back to the caller through a synthesized voice in the caller's native language. AI can be used by government policy analysts to accelerate their research, synthesize massive amounts of data, including survey responses and public inquiries, and draft succinct and plain language summaries to help inform decision makers. AI technology could also help cut down on delays to access government services and benefits by spotting eligible individuals based on established criteria and automating the application process, reducing their need to apply and wait for processing, which might otherwise take weeks or even months. AI is being integrated into healthcare to enhance diagnosis and treatment through virtual AI assistants that can provide customized and real-time recommendations to patients 24/7. AI can assess complex risk factors and interpret medical images, sometimes catching things the human eye might miss, leading to earlier detection of disease. And AI can improve the management of the health system by predicting healthcare needs and length of hospital stays so that resources can be allocated accordingly. AI is increasingly being used in recruitment processes to assist employers in screening candidates and finding the best person for a job, enhancing productivity, performance, and retention. In fact, the Ontario government recently proposed Bill 149, which acknowledges the existence of these practices and would, if passed, require employers to be transparent about their use of AI in hiring practices. While the power of AI can lead to benefits like these and many more, we also know of its cautionary tales. Despite its many promises and all of its hype, AI is not infallible. We've seen many documented cases where algorithms have either failed to return accurate results or have perpetuated discrimination and bias against historically marginalized groups, with serious ramifications. For example, an algorithm used in hospitals to predict who was more likely to require extensive medical care turned out to be heavily skewed in favor of white patients over black patients. Another algorithm used in the justice system to predict the likelihood of recidivism returned twice as many false positives among black offenders compared with white offenders. An algorithm used to accelerate recruitment processes was found to be inherently biased against women candidates. Other examples of flawed algorithms include cases where European names were favored over African American names, or where facial recognition systems failed to recognize darker skin tones. These and many other examples speak to the importance of ridding bias from the data sources used to train algorithms in the first place, as well as the need for human supervision over the returning results. AI, particularly generative AI, brings with it some security dangers as well. Malicious actors have already worked out how to synthetically mimic CEOs' voices down to their exact tone and accent, duping employees into thinking that their boss is asking them to transfer funds to some account. Deep fakes, which look and speak like real humans, are sometimes used to poke fun by showing world leaders frolicking together on a beach somewhere, or Pope Francis in a stylish white puffer jacket. Other times they can be used more nefariously to sully people's reputations, spread propaganda, wreak economic havoc, and even steal elections. A fake explosion of the Pentagon that caused a brief drop in the stock market, and a fabricated video of filmmaker Michael Moore recently voicing support for Trump as the Republican presidential nominee for 2024 are no laughing matter. In my blog, Privacy and Humanity on the Brink, I wrote about the need to regulate the design and use of AI technology. I spoke about the existential threats to our sense of human agency and our future as a human species, but also about the very real risks facing us here and now. I noted that Ontario has a unique opportunity to lead in this area by developing a thoughtfully articulated, principled framework that balances fundamental values of individual autonomy, dignity, and integrity with broader societal interests. We need to put in place comprehensive and binding guardrails around the use of AI technologies that protect our safety, privacy, and human rights. Around the world, regulators and legislators are passing legislation to address these and other issues. The European Council and Parliament have recently reached a provisional agreement after lengthy negotiations over the EU proposed AI Act. This act takes a risk-based approach to regulating AI, supporting innovation, but with greater transparency and accountability, and with several backstops, including prohibitions against cognitive behavioral manipulation, the scraping of facial images from the internet, and the use of social scoring and biometric categorization to infer sensitive data. In California, the AI Accountability Act has been introduced with the aim of creating a roadmap, guardrails, and regulations for the use of AI technologies by state agencies, and this includes requiring notice to the public when they are interacting with AI. In Canada, the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, part of Bill C-27, would require having measures in place to identify and mitigate the risks of harm or biased output and to monitor compliance. But this federal legislation would not cover the public sector in Ontario, and this is why it is so essential for us to develop our own framework here. The Ontario government has already taken some positive steps by building various components of a trustworthy AI framework, but Ontario can and must do more. In May, I issued a joint statement with Chief Commissioner Deguire of the Ontario Human Rights Commission, calling on the Ontario government to establish a more robust and granular set of binding rules governing public sector use of AI that respects human rights, including privacy, and upholds human dignity as a fundamental value. In my last annual report, I reiterated my call for government to continue fleshing out its AI framework with binding rules and appropriate effective oversight to ensure AI use is safe, transparent, accountable, and ethically responsible. My office also joined our federal, provincial, and territorial counterparts in releasing principles for responsible, trustworthy, and privacy-protective generative AI technologies. These principles are intended to help organizations build privacy protection right into the design of generative AI tools and throughout their development, provision, and downstream use. They're devised to mitigate risks, particularly for vulnerable and historically marginalized groups, and to ensure that generative content, which would have or could have significant impact on individuals, is identified as having been created by generative AI. On the international front, the IPC co-sponsored 2 resolutions at the 45th Global Privacy Assembly that were unanimously adopted by data protection authorities around the world. One on generative artificial intelligence systems, and the other on artificial intelligence and employment, both of which closely align and resonate with the kinds of things we've been saying and calling for here at home. Algorithmic systems are powerful tools of measurement, management, and optimization. Ultimately, however, their successful adoption by public institutions can only be achieved with the public's trust and confidence that these tools are being used in a safe, privacy-protective, and ethically responsible manner. I'm so much looking forward to our panel discussion this morning, which promises to be a highly engaging conversation about many of these issues. I want to thank you again, all of you, for joining us here today, in person and online, and I invite you to submit your questions to our panelists by emailing privacyday@ipc.on.ca. And so with that introduction, I will turn things over to Assistant Commissioner Mike Maddock to introduce our panelists. Thank you. Merci.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for this fantastic turnout here in person at Mars. It's really great to see everyone on a bit of a wet, slushy day. It was great to see some familiar faces and meet some new people, new faces. People in this age of post-COVID where you've only seen them online. So getting a chance to see people in real life and hear those immortal words, "Gosh, you're taller than I thought you'd be." And I always wonder if I should say thank you or sorry. I'm never really sure. So thank you for being here. To all the people online, such a fantastic amount of interest in this session. So welcome. The Commissioner highlighted, we're going to be engaging both folks here in person and online in a Q&A session at the end, so please get your questions in. If you're virtual, they will make their way to me, and we'll make sure we get through as many of them as we can. I'm Mike. I'm the Assistant Commissioner, External Relations and Strategic Initiatives at the IPC. I've been there now 7 months, and I've had a wonderful opportunity to work with Commissioner Kosame, who's a visionary leader, and a fantastic team. I went there with lots of hopes and dreams, and it's really exceeded them, and it's an exciting place to be. And I think it'll be reflected here in some of the topics and issues we're going to talk about today. So, welcome. So I'm going to start by introducing this fantastic panel. Up first is Melissa Kittmer. Melissa is the Assistant Deputy Minister of the Policy and Data Division with Ontario's Ministry of Public and Business Service Delivery. She is responsible for providing policy leadership on information access, protection, digital trust, artificial intelligence, and other emerging issues. Welcome, Melissa. I'd also like to welcome Colin McKay, a public policy and government relations specialist who has led work at the intersection of privacy, data protection, and transformative technologies for more than 2 decades now. Most recently at Google, he was an advocate for the development and implementation of AI tools while recognizing the need for careful internal, external, and regulatory oversight. Welcome, Colin. Good to see you again. We're also joined in the middle, sandwiched, by the IPC's very own Chris Parsons, Manager of Technology Policy at the Information and Privacy Commissioner Office. Christopher joined the IPC from Monk's School Citizen Lab at the University of Toronto, where his research focused on third-party access to telecommunications data, data privacy, data security, and national security. I get the pleasure of working with Chris every day, and he's pretty amazing. That's not in his official bio, but I wanted to highlight that. Dr. Teresa Scassa is with us today. Teresa is the Canada Research Chair in Information Law and Policy at the University of Ottawa, Faculty of Law. Last year, Teresa worked closely with us at the IPC as the IPC Scholar in Residence. Teresa has served on several national and provincial advisory panels on law and technology-related issues. She has written widely about privacy law, data governance, intellectual property law, law and technology, AI, and smart cities. And please check out Teresa's fantastic blog where she writes about a number of those issues. I'll go to Stephen and then I'll go online. So we've got Stephen Toop, currently the President and CEO of the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. a Canadian-based global research organization. Prior to that, he was Vice Chancellor of the University of Cambridge, the first non-UK national to hold the post. Stephen publishes in global journals on human rights, international dispute resolution, international environmental law, the use of force, international legal theory, and has lectured at universities around the world. Welcome, Stephen. And online, from across the pond, in the UK is Dr. Jenny Tennyson. She is the founder of Connected by Data, a campaign that aims to put community at the center of data narratives, practices, and policies. She is a senior fellow at the Center for International Governance Innovation, adjunct professor at Southampton's Web Science Institute, associate researcher at Cambridge Bennett Institute for Public Policy, and a Shuttleworth Foundation fellow. Jenny is also former co-chair of the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence Data Governance Working Group. Good morning, Jenny. All right. Well, thank you to this panel. How about we start off with a big round of applause for this great panel? Get the blood flowing. All right, so first question, get us started. I'm gonna go to Melissa. Melissa, as Assistant Deputy Minister of the Policy and Data Division with Ontario's Ministry of Public and Business Service Delivery, you see firsthand the most pressing challenges facing Ontario's public sector today. How can these challenges be addressed through innovative development of AI, and what risks should public servants be mindful of when integrating AI into their work?
Great. Mic check. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Thank you. I'm not used to this technology. Really, thank you for the opportunity to be here. Really excited to be part of today's discussion and to be able to speak to everyone about the important work that's underway to build Ontario's trustworthy AI framework. The question speaks about risks and challenges and how can we in the public service manage these risks while we're being innovative in terms of the deployment of artificial intelligence. Before we speak to the risks, I think it's really important to recognize that artificial intelligence does offer incredible opportunities and potential to enable innovation and to transform service delivery so that we can better serve people as well as try to find efficiencies by saving time and money. But there are risks, and the Commissioner did speak to some of those in the opening remarks, and just wanted to highlight what some of those risks are. First and foremost, we know that there are risks for potential discrimination and violation of human rights. We do know that there are cybersecurity risks. There are legal risks, including violation of rights such as intellectual property, as well as privacy. We know that there are potential data biases, and then there are also, as the Commissioner spoke to, the potential spread for disinformation. So lots of risks to be managing within the space. And from a public sector perspective, trying to ensure how can we leverage the benefits of artificial intelligence while ensuring that we are mitigating and managing these risks to try to minimize the harm to people in Ontario. And that's really where the trustworthy artificial intelligence framework comes into play. So the work on the framework started in 2021. It was part of Ontario's digital and data strategy and was in response to public feedback. We heard there was a significant interest in wanting to understand when is artificial intelligence being used, and particularly to inform decisions that might impact people and businesses, and then to ensure that it's being used in a way that's equitable and fair. So our framework, we haven't been doing it alone. We've been working with a lot of experts in the community. So we have an expert artificial intelligence working group, which consists of a number of key experts from, I'd say, civil society, industry, and academia. And Teresa Scassa is one of our members on the expert working group, so pleased to be on the panel with her today. And it really is rooted in developing a risk-based approach to managing the risks of artificial intelligence, to ensure that government is using AI in a responsible way, ensuring that we are accountable, transparent, and really, really responsible. Those are my 3 words for today. It has 3 strategic priorities. The first is AI, artificial intelligence. So I'll probably say AI and artificial intelligence throughout the day, but I think everyone knows that AI is artificial intelligence. AI that people can trust. And really, what does that mean in terms of a strategic priority? It's really being clear about what are the risks associated with using artificial intelligence, clearly defining them, putting in place mitigation strategies to really minimize harm and to protect people. The second priority is AI that people can trust. Did I already say that? Oh, sorry, AI that serves all people in Ontario. And that really is ensuring that there are mechanisms in place so that there are opportunities to challenge decisions that might have been informed by artificial intelligence, so being very transparent about those. And the third is no AI in secret. And that really is about ensuring that there is transparency and disclosure, and it's clearly understood when AI has been used to inform decisions. So really together, these three priorities and the work that we're doing in the Ontario government is to develop a framework that will enable the responsible use of AI. It will be made up of various policies, products, and guidance and tools, and really to ensure that we are transparent, responsible, and accountable. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. We're actually going to be coming back to the concept of no AI in secret a bit later. You know, the work you're doing, particularly we saw it through COVID, during times of change, people look to government to understand sort of the guardrails and best practices that they should put in place, which is going to lead us a bit into the conversation I have, or the question I have for Stephen, who's up next. So Stephen, as the head of Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, CFAR, you lead the Pan-Canadian AI strategy. A couple questions for you. Where does Canada rank globally in terms of AI research and development? And how do you make sure that in advancing the science and technology behind AI and pursuing its opportunities, we're also paying sufficient attention to addressing its legal, ethical, and societal implications?
Well, thanks, Mike. It's great to be here, and thanks, Patricia, for the invitation. It's wonderful to be with people who really are tremendously expert in the areas we're discussing. The Pan-Canadian Artificial Intelligence Strategy, and I'll call it PCASE, was founded in 2017, and the instinct was that there was tremendous talent in Canada, but it was not being effectively harnessed. And that talent was situated in a number of different sites across the country, and there'll be names that you will recognize from television and reporting over the last while. Jeff Hinton here in Toronto, Yoshua Bengio in Montreal, and Richard Sutton in Edmonton, all of whom are credited with being really founders of some of the core technology which has grounded artificial intelligence. And there was a sense that we should therefore try to build on that. So the play for Canada in 2017, to be really clear, was a talent play. So the argument was, we have to do everything possible to join up the talent that exists across the country and to supercharge it through the attraction of new people into the country, through the retention of some of our best people, because we were losing them to places like Google and elsewhere in other parts of the world, and to actually develop homegrown talent by creating new systems in universities that were going to create a cadre of people with real artificial intelligence expertise. And at the same time, there was a focus on the core question of responsible AI. How do we ensure safety, equity, and inclusion? And those were really the two frames for the 2017 policy. It was not at the time a commercial play. Maybe that was a mistake, but that was the decision taken, that it was necessary to build up the talent before trying to really focus on commercialization opportunities. But in phase 2 of the Pan-Canadian strategy, there was a reaffirmation of the importance of commercial opportunity, and the government, the federal government, chose to take that on itself. So in the second phase of the Pan-Canadian strategy, the government said, we want to drive the commercialization piece, not CFAR, interestingly enough. Now, where does that all leave us? Well, actually, it's incredible what's happened. There are now 120 or more, just over, chairs, Pan-Canadian CFAR Canada AI chairs across the country, located in connection with our 3 core institutes. So Vector here in Toronto, Mila in Montreal, and Amy in Edmonton. Canada's ranked 5th in the world on the Global AI Index, which is a benchmark of nations' readiness in terms of investment, innovation, and implementation of artificial intelligence. I want to signal, though, we were 4. We're going down, and I'll come back to that. Since 2019, Canada has retained its first place lead in the global ranking of G7 nations in the field of AI papers per capita. So the research base is top flight. So we took as the central premise of that first pan-Canadian strategy that talent attracts talent, and that has proven to be correct. Today, according to the OECD, the average growth in Canada's cohort of AI talent has been 38% each year since 2018. And that outranks the US, United Kingdom, Germany, France, etc. I'm also very proud to note that Canada ranks first in the world in our year-over-year percentage growth of women working in AI since 2019. Now, it was a low base, but we're up just last year alone by 67%. But there's a lot more work to be done. That's why we continue to develop programs like the AI for Good Lab for early career women and people of diverse genders in machine learning. And we also maintain firm targets for gender representation amongst Canada's CFAR chairs. Patricia mentioned, of course, the problem of bias, and that is absolutely central to the work that we're doing. And I'll come back to that in relation to a later question. So I just want to conclude by saying, I'd hinted before that there are bumps in the road. We're number 4, now number 5. Why is that happening? Well, I would say that one of the main reasons is that we lack supercomputing power within Canada. This is a huge challenge for Canada across the board. Why does that matter? Well, modern AI, especially generative AI, is computationally exhausting and expensive. It's absolutely crucial that we have access for Canadian startups, for companies, the public sector, and researchers. Computing power is core, and we simply don't have enough. We're way down the list, in the 20s, on our ability to provide computing power to the people who work in AI in Canada. It's also important to say you can't do large language models, for example, without really powerful computing. And this is going to inhibit our commercial opportunities as well unless we address this problem. So other countries are making major investments, the United Kingdom, the US, other G7 nations, in computing platforms for AI. Canada needs to get its act together on this. At the same time, we need to develop more sophisticated approaches to intellectual property in AI. As I said, the first element of this strategy was all about talent. But now, if we're going to drive that harder, we have to be more tough-minded in thinking through how we retain the advantages that the research in Canada creates. Finally, I will simply say that we're working in the strategy across the country and with industry to address the very real potential risks for AI that both Melissa and Patricia emphasized. So we're an AI powerhouse in research, and we have an opportunity to continue to be a leader. But I do think we're at an inflection point, I'll be frank, for Canada right now. A few months ago, I co-authored a very long essay in the Globe and Mail with David Naylor, speaking to our country's problems with innovation. I think we have some messy policy, we've got inadequate funding and infrastructure, and our leadership could actually unravel. So it's a story of success, but it's a story of contingent success, and we need to keep our eye on the ball in all the ways I've suggested if we're going to be an AI leader going forward.
Yeah, well, thanks, Stephen, and thanks for sharing some of those metrics with folks. I don't think generally we have, when we talk about AI, we get in a bit of a good and bad, but you know, the foundation that we have here in Ontario and Canada, so thanks for sharing that, yeah. I'm wondering, as you're sort of talking about we slipped from 4 to 5 and the investment we've made in talent, have we held on to talent? Because I'm assuming a talent war is upon us.
It is absolutely upon us. It's already present. The short answer is so far, so good. We've held on to talent, and I give a lot of credit to our colleagues at these 3 AI institutes who've really worked hard to integrate people, to give them opportunities, but there is real frustration around the lack of compute. Right. I will, if I may, just add one other point, which is that we have worked really hard to make sure that we are addressing AI from the perspective of its responsible use. And to the talent point, that's actually an attractor for talent. I'm constantly aware that so many of our Canada Research chairs, CFAR Canada chairs, and the students that are working with them, and there are thousands of them now, are actually highly motivated by trying to ensure that AI is used responsibly. They're not just techno geeks. Let's be really frank about this. Yes, of course, they're excited about the opportunities, they're excited about the core scientific research, but they're also excited about Canada's potential to be a research leader if it focuses on the responsible use of AI.
Great. Well, thank you, Stephen. I'm excited now.
I think we should all be excited.
Yeah.
I really do.
Yeah, no, thank you. Okay, our next question I'm going to share with Chris. Chris, when we think about AI and the risk to privacy, most of us immediately associate those risks with overreaching government surveillance. So, for example, security, law enforcement, topics you examined in depth when you worked at the Citizen Lab. How would you describe those risks a bit more deeply and clearly for folks, and what other risks are there to our privacy and other human rights when it comes to AI?
Well, thanks for the question, Mike. So first, we just have to recognize that AI is a very powerful tool, and it can be deployed in a number of different contexts, both for security and policing purposes. And also, many of those purposes are positive or benign. However, rightfully, individuals in Canada should be concerned about how it can have very forceful and impactful negative impacts on their privacy or other human rights. So let me first turn to some of the national security related issues, which I took up at the Citizen Lab extensively. First, one of the things we need to recognize is that artificial intelligence technologies have been used for decades to automate the processing and analysis of data and extract insights from it that are then acted on either by automated systems or by the human analyst to whom information is then prompted to. So CSIS, our security service, and CSC, our signals intelligence agency, have been using these kind of processing techniques for decades. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be concerned, it's just worth putting in context. Now, what is really changing right now is there is a massive acceleration in the availability of computing power. It's plummeting. You can basically store things for free when you're talking truly bulk quantities. It's not free, there's still a cost, but if you look at the cost today versus 10 years ago, you're not paying real money anymore. And moreover, there's more access to talent and platforms and resources that enable the integration of advanced AI systems and algorithms into the collection, analysis, and disclosure of this information. So many of the privacy and human rights concerns are often associated with that collection. How is it collected? Under what terms? Whom is affected by it? The analysis of it. What insights are derived? Is those analyses discriminatory or otherwise inappropriate? And then finally, what actions are taken? When we're talking about security services or signals intelligence agencies, you may never interact with them. And yet you can't open a bank account, you can't transfer funds, or other normal life activities are denied to you for entirely invisible reasons. And so there are positive uses to it. We can see it especially in the realms of cybersecurity and automated defense systems, which CSC is involved in protecting the Government of Canada and critical infrastructure systems. In here, it's analyzing all of the threat data that's coming in and targeting these systems, and both assisting analysts in providing responses and simultaneously automatically defending Government of Canada systems. But we also know that when we turn to signals intelligence in particular, that side of the security equation, there is bulk or mass surveillance that happens, and it indiscriminately affects individuals around the world, clearly affecting their human rights and privacy interests. When we look at law enforcement, AI, again, is used today, and it has been used for some time. We can look at the use of computer vision, which powers the license plate recognition systems that police cars use to identify if a license plate is a hit or not in one of their databases. The use of facial recognition and mugshots databases. Text-based analysis for forensics, where all of the data on your phone or laptop are automatically analyzed for particular kinds of content. Now, this can be used clearly for lawful and legitimate purposes. However, questions or issues arise when the tools that are deployed are inefficient or they output results that are incorrect. Moreover, when the public doesn't know what's being used, and I think quite often the public trust issues that are associated with law enforcement uses of the technologies are when it's the Globe and Mail or the Toronto Star that reveals what it is, as opposed to a full and frank discussion with the public. And where this becomes even more problematic is when law enforcement is dependent on bad AI that is either generating problematic outputs or alternately is based upon unlawfully collected data. And I think one of the prominent examples in Canada is Clearview AI, which the technology company collected huge bulk volumes of persons' faces, ran analyses to build templates, and then made it available to law enforcement. The collection of that data is in strong contest by many of the privacy commissioners in Canada, not the IPC, but many of our other counterparts. And broadly, the concerns with law enforcement are similar to national security: the collection, the use, the processing, retention, secondary uses of the data, but with the difference being that law enforcement officers are far more likely to actually interact with those individuals, potentially with very significant implications. And just finally, you said, what are the broader human rights concerns? So I'll just touch really quickly. First, baseline infringements of freedom of expression and association can be quite common. People are chilled in interacting with others. You can see infringements of the right to equity and freedom from discrimination when we have biased algorithms that are collecting data or suggesting action be taken towards individuals. And of course, there's also the risk that there's an infringement of the right of due process, especially in the law enforcement context, but not exclusively, when individuals who may be accused of a crime can't ever know how technology works, which impedes their ability to bring a full defense and thus compromises their ability to have a fair trial and a fair process. So those are some of the items that we took up at the lab as it pertained to national security, security services, and law enforcement, and the human rights implications.
All right, no, thank you, Chris. And you touched on a few themes there, which we sort of started with Melissa, around trust and transparency. That we're going to be picking up throughout today's talk. And that's a good bridge over to Colin, looking to you, Colin, for a bit of a peek into the private sector and its role in this space. So as someone who's worked both in public and private sector roles, most recently Google's head of public policy in Canada, you understand both worlds. I've had the opportunity to work with you in that role, and especially the interactions that are needed for success. What is the role of private sector in supporting government AI objectives, and can it and should it be entrusted with ensuring individual safety and advancing the public good?
Thanks very much, Mike, and thank you, Commissioner, for the opportunity. It's great to see so many people I've worked with in the past in the room. Building on what Chris was just speaking about, I've been thinking about this particular part of my conversation around the contextual and operational relationship between consumer applications of AI and generative AI, and then the application of AI and generative AI in a modern government or public sector perspective. And what Chris was speaking to was the distinction between using these tools for popular applications that simplify or render more efficient the services that every citizen expects from their government, and then using these tools to drive decision-making or outputs that can significantly affect the personal rights of an individual in very specific circumstances. And this is extremely relevant to the conversation around how do we build trust around personal public safety and public good in the context of these new technologies. And when I say contextual, I want to spend 10 seconds having you take a trip back in time from the perspective of both a consumer and a regulator. Because we've only been dealing with the ability for a device in our pocket or on our desktop to transform information magically and rapidly accelerate our interaction with that information for about 25 years. Search at its foundations used to be a horrible experience that was extremely biased and was untrustworthy. And over the past 25 years, we've seen an evolution of these technologies, but they've been at a speed where we've been reasonably aware that the information that's being presented to us, the options that are being presented to us, are changing in shape, they're changing in tone, they're changing in technological format. And what happened during that process is regulators had to speed up and start running alongside the development of the technology and push for stronger regulatory frameworks around the tools and the collection of information that underpin those tools, whether general information in the context of general search or personal information. And some of the foundational concern about trust around technology was in that period about 2008 to 2014, where technology companies had not built internal teams in order to communicate clearly about how they were collecting information, how they were trying to treat it responsibly, and importantly, how their relationship with regulators on how they would be held accountable for both their collection, but also their commitment to users. And that has built upon a historic sense of caution built by science fiction that we all love around the most leading edge technology. And that naturally helps frame the context around how we consider AI, since especially AI is a term that's been used for 50 years to conceptualize the worst possible outcomes of the interaction between humans and technology, as well as the best possible outcomes. But when I speak to operational context, the reality is that while the Commissioner referenced 2023 as the moment when we as the general public realized that generative AI was a powerful tool that could transform how we interacted with information and an information environment, the reality is that the foundational document was published in 2017, and the research for it was several years before that. And it was built on the work that Stephen mentioned from Jeff and others in Canada around neural networks. The reality around neural networks is it took 25 years for compute capacity to be able to generate the outputs that had been anticipated, predicted, and in fact came to fruition. We've now seen generative AI, it's taken 6 years to develop a general consumer application to that foundational observation. But the difference we have in the environment around public trust is that in the case of the large organizations, but I think also medium and small, there's a much more nuanced and very alert awareness of the elements of the information and data that's used to feed into these models and their outputs, and questions about bias, questions about the veracity and the authenticity, and also the accountability around the inputs and the outputs of these models. So the focus, certainly at the large company level, since those foundational models, has been around building responsible AI teams that have significant components of not just technologists, but ethicists, privacy specialists, and data security specialists, so that we saw ChatGPT emerge a year and a half ago, but we've already seen every single one of the large and medium-sized companies, several Canadian included, come out with very strong positions on not just broad goals, but how they're implementing responsible AI practices and how they're supporting that with key investments. And I'm not saying that to just cheer on this effort, because it's still very fraught and it's very uncertain. But the debate we're having around generative AI, considering how we initially had that debate around privacy and technology 18, 20 years ago, is much more accelerated, but it's also much more informed. We're all here speaking in much greater detail, much greater nuance about the complexities of a number of different pieces of technology. And we have, as Teresa's going to mention, a number of different global initiatives to create not just general frameworks, but comprehensive frameworks to frame that interaction. And I think part of the role that the private sector can do to conclude is there has to be this focus, as Chris was highlighting, on the part of government around potential bias and the importance of the outcomes. And the reality is that large and medium-sized companies that have built these foundational models can provide the specialist expertise to help introduce the ideas and the debate, and importantly, force a conversation around data cleanliness, process optimization, and then a clear and focused goal in the application of technology, so that it's not just experimentation. And that's the foundational elements for being able to communicate it to citizens and have that explicability that then defends it.
Right. No, thanks, Colin. And yeah, that explainability, that transparency, again, we'll come back to it. And thanks for the flag. It's a good one. As generative AI, ChatGPT were coming out, the large players were very much embedded in that process as it came forward, which is why we've seen such an acceleration. So we're going to pivot a little bit to Teresa. So we've heard around some risks and from a perspective from the private sector. Teresa, we are seeing jurisdictions worldwide and within Canada aiming to regulate AI so that their development, deployment, and use is safe, trustworthy, accountable, and human rights affirming. As Canada Research Chair in Information Law and Policy at the University of Ottawa, you've spent a lot of time studying and thinking about appropriate forms of AI governance. What can Ontario learn from other jurisdictions, from how other jurisdictions are regulating AI, and what strategies or frameworks would enable Ontario to benefit from these technologies?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Mike, and thank you also for the invitation to be part of this panel and this really interesting discussion this morning. So Ontario is one of 13 provinces and territories in a federal state, the federal government, and so I think when we think about, what can Ontario learn from and what should Ontario be doing, I think we need to situate it in that context because I think one of the particular challenges in Canada is interoperability of policies, approaches, of laws, and this becomes particularly important with AI. So I think we really need to be thinking about not just what we want to do, but what other provinces are doing, what the federal government is doing, and ensuring that we have some alignment with those. There's certainly experience that we can draw on globally, but I think we also have to be thinking about that interoperable national level. As the Commissioner mentioned in her opening remarks, the federal government has a bill before Parliament that includes an AI and Data Act, which is aimed at governing the AI at the design and development stage. In other words, to ensure that the design and development of AI tools and technologies is in conformity with best practices and principles. But that's going to leave a lot of gaps because of the nature of our federal state. And so there are some things, again, as the Commissioner mentioned, that are going to be things for the provinces and territories to address themselves, and that this is part of the space in which Ontario is working. And of course, one of those is the public sector and what's going to happen at the public sector level. Now, it may be that if someone in the Ontario public sector decides to adopt a tool or technology that has been designed by the private sector, that if the Federal AI and Data Act takes effect, that has been designed and developed in conformity with that legislation. But there's still normative space for Ontario here because the government needs to be thinking about not just shiny vendor presentations like, oh, here's a cool tool, why don't we try this? It looks like a lot of fun or it looks really interesting. But they need to be thinking about what problems we need to address in Ontario, whether AI is an appropriate tool or technology to use to solve those problems. If so, what kind of AI, designed by whom, what should it look like, what data should feed it? And these are questions for governance at the public sector level. And so Ontario has been, as Melissa has spoken to, has been working on these kinds of issues and these kinds of questions, and that work is ongoing and needs to continue. It can certainly draw on examples from other jurisdictions. One of them is the federal directive on automated decision-making for the public sector. And that's a directive and a tool, an algorithmic assessment tool that can be looked to as an example, not just as an example to copy, but you can look to the experience with that tool since 2019 to see where the weaknesses are, where the problems have been, how to do things better, maybe to drawing attention to gaps or that could be better addressed. And so everything is happening in real time and everything is happening very quickly. So it's not just what models are out there, but what's the experience been with those models and how can we learn from those? Briefly, some of the gaps that will exist even with an AI and Data Act at the federal level. The health sector, which is under provincial jurisdiction, there will be important gaps, although health AI is contemplated and is partly also under the jurisdiction of Health Canada in terms of AI-enabled medical devices, for example. There still will be health AI that we need to be thinking about governing at the provincial level. Chris has already spoken about law enforcement, and there are decisions that will have to be made about the use of AI technologies, about law enforcement, guidance, decisions about what is acceptable in our society in terms of surveillance or policing and so on. There's also, I think, the important issue of empowering and resourcing existing regulators to address AI issues that arise within their areas of competence. And of course, we have the Privacy Commissioner is hosting this event. The Privacy Commissioner has tremendous expertise in privacy and data governance, which are both very important aspects of AI, and that expertise is in the health sector and in the public sector. And so relying on and adequately resourcing those regulators to be part of the public sector solutions that are developed, I think is important. And of course, the Ontario Human Rights Commission is another one that has experience with bias and discrimination, and resourcing is important. I'm going to, I don't want to use up all the time because I certainly want to hear from Jenny, but I'll mention data governance as another area where the province sits on important data resources that can be used in developing AI, but the appropriate stewardship of that data, ensuring that that data is inclusive and appropriate for use is a tremendously important role that at the provincial level. And the Law Commission of Ontario has made recommendations about a number of these issues. So I'll flag the work of the Law Commission of Ontario around public sector AI as well, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Teresa. One of the things you touched on, which I think we're going to talk a bit more after the break, is that pressure to design governance, design regulatory frameworks in real time, and the pressure that's putting on governments and regulators of all sorts to try to be in lockstep with these technologies as they move at a quick pace. So thanks for flagging that. I'm going to move again, magically in this day and age, across the pond to Jenny. Apologies, Jenny, I didn't do a sound check at the beginning. I saw you nodding throughout, so I'm assuming everything is okay on your end. Great. Again, thank you for joining us. As founder and executive director of Connected by Data in the UK and former co-chair of the Data Governance Working Group at the Global Partnership on AI, you are particularly concerned with questions of transparency, open data, and community justice. What are some of the challenges around transparency and explainability of AI, and how can we break down barriers to accessibility and understanding?
Thanks for the question, and can I just do a bit of a sound check myself? Can you wave to me if you can hear? Yay, good, thank you. And I do apologise for kind of my slightly big brother appearance looming over you. I know it's a bit weird, but I'm really grateful for having the chance to speak today. Yeah, when we talk about transparency and explainability, I feel like we often bandy about those terms as if they're a kind of understood good, that we just understand what they mean and why we need them. But I think we need to dig a bit deeper into what the purpose of transparency and explainability actually are. So let's talk about trust, let's talk about kind of challenge and accountability, and let's talk about also innovation and competition and the role of transparency around those. We've already touched on the importance of public trust, and the observation that obscurity around the use of algorithms, data, and AI really breeds a distrust and makes people concerned about what might be happening behind closed doors. So there's a real urge for transparency just to build public trust in the way in which, in particular, the public sector is using data and AI. But we also need to look at the way in which transparency can build trust for the individuals who are actually operating those systems. So for the caseworkers, for doctors, for judges in adopting those systems themselves, and for the organizations who are procuring those systems to build trust that they can procure those safely, that they're not going to be running into any risks of reputational damage, of financial or legal liabilities, of actually breaking trust with their citizens, with the people that they're working with. I'm speaking today from a context where I don't know how much of it has reached across to Canada, but we've had a big story here around the Horizon system, which was procured right at the beginning of the 2000 and late 20th century around for the post office, where it turned out that system was buggy. It's led to all sorts of severe miscarriages of justice. It's led to lives being ruined, and those like if you're procuring a system, you don't want those things to happen, and you need to have some trust in and established trust in the way in which those systems are operating, and transparency and explainability of what's going on within these systems is absolutely essential for that. The second thing is we need to have transparency and explainability in order to enable individuals and their representatives to actually challenge those systems, to also enable researchers to investigate the kinds of biases that we've talked about in data and the way in which the systems have been created, and to flag up any errors and problems that they might see. And similarly for regulators to be able to have access as well. So to really challenge and to be able to correct systems when they go wrong. And then the third thing that we need to think about for transparency is how we are promoting innovation and competition, enabling other organizations, startups and not-for-profits to also develop systems that might compete with ones that are already out there. And that's particularly important in a government setting where there is big risk of just adopting AI systems from the same old vendors and having a real lock-in and being really held over a barrel by big vendors who are selling these kinds of systems. So where transparency can be a way of breaking that up, of enabling others to produce competition. So then to move on to the challenges for how we get transparency and explainability that support those purposes, I think three things that I want to just highlight. First is there's often a confusion between transparency and openness. When we're talking about transparency, it's transparency for particular purposes and to particular people, whereas openness will be something that is open for everybody to use and to understand and to get to grips with. And for many of the purposes that we're talking about, particularly audit or for building trust in the way in which a system is operating, you don't need openness, but you do need transparency for the people who are actually needing to access that system in limited ways. So often the objections that are posed to transparency are actually about the more severe forms of openness, so actually making lots of data and information public, where understandably organizations get worried about revealing secrets when that happens. But if we can focus on transparency and who needs to access in what ways, then I think we're in a better place. So that leads on to my second point. What kinds of things do we need transparency about? We talk a lot about transparency of data, of the models themselves, but I think it's also important that we have transparency around the development process for these systems, the level in which they're engaging with other stakeholders, the kinds of impact assessment that they've done, and the results of that impact assessment, impact monitoring of systems, in particular when it comes to equalities monitoring. And also, again, this is a learning coming out of the Horizon Post Office scandal over here, transparency about complaints that are being made about this system. Because when you see a pattern of complaints or concerns being raised about the way in which a particular system is operating, that should be a flag that you need to have a deeper understanding of it. We don't often have complaints as a transparency thing in our frameworks, and I think we should. And then the third challenge is really about capacity. We've already talked about the need for computing power in order to get to grips with the kind of volumes of data that we're talking about and the kinds of models that we're talking about being used. And that computing power isn't just for the kind of innovators and the people who are developing AI. We also need that computing power in civil society, in academia, in those challenging organizations that are going to be holding to account the organizations that are developing and deploying AI. Because we need them to be able to detect when things are going wrong and flag those up early so that we can correct them immediately. So yeah, just to summarize, we should be thinking about the purpose of transparency and explainability as we're putting these frameworks together, and really thinking through who needs access to what and why, and making sure that they don't just have access to the information, but also to the other things around them that enable them to, such as computing power, legal kind of powers as well, that enable them to really act on that transparency.
Thanks, Jenny. That's actually a fantastic bridge heading into the break to end on, and concepts we'll pick up shortly. We're going to end very quickly with a little rapid fire exercise, just to end on a fun note. And I'll go back to you. I won't leave the UK. I'm going to start with you, Jenny, and I'll come back to folks here in Toronto. Each of you is deeply involved and in AI from different perspectives, as we've heard across the panel this morning, and spend much of your day, I am sure, thinking about AI, opportunities, challenges, risks, benefits, etc. So if we were to go inside these amazing brains and pull out a bit of a word cloud of your main thoughts around AI, what are the 3 words that would stand out the most in your internal word cloud? So we'll go to you, Jenny.
Cool. So my 3 words would be, first of all, power, because who has power determines the kinds of outcomes that we're likely to see from this technology. Community, because I really believe we need to understand affected communities, and also that we need community-based action to get to those good outcomes. And also vision, because what I see missing is the picture of the world that we want to create and how data and AI fit in with that we need to use in order to guide our development of data and AI.
Okay, thanks, Jenny. I'll go to Teresa.
Yeah, so we sent these words around by email, and I was one of the first ones to do this, and I realized after the fact when I saw everybody else's how incredibly boring either my choices were or my life is, and so I'm not sure which that is. Because, you know, I work in a law faculty, and I think a lot about these sort of particular types of things. So the words that came to my mind were risk, regulation, and governance, which are, you know, frankly are like really boring anyway. But there you go. That's what I think about a lot all the time.
Thanks, Teresa. Colin.
Thinking about public trustworthiness and transparency, mine are fast-paced, nuanced, and noisy, which is the conversation we've been having this morning. So,
Thanks, Colin. Chris.
I feel like someone just looked literally off my screen that was right here. So
I shared them by email.
Actually, mine are also the same. So literally, we have fast-paced, nuanced, and noisy. So this is, I think that we're winning the word cloud.
Yeah.
And the reason that I chose them is just this is a policy space that is accelerating with just profound speed. And there are gems that you find all over the place, while simultaneously, because everyone is diving in, it can be hard to find that nuance. And so it's an incredibly exciting and dynamic space, but it's also challenging, frankly, from a policymaking position to figure out what to pay attention to, what not, and what to pay attention to in what you're paying attention to.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Stephen.
I went even further than Teresa, and I decided I didn't like the words I'd circulated, so I'm changing them. How's that? Is that fair? Excitement, worry, and complexity. And I'll only say something about the last one, because when you think about things we've already heard, international regulation, national attempts to both create competition and regulation, regional, provincial within Canada, this is a really messy space.
All right, thanks, Stephen. And we'll end with Melissa.
Great, thanks. And my 3 words really are anchored in our trustworthy AI framework. And I think just the conversation this morning really emphasizes the responsibility we have to ensure the guardrails are in place. So my words are trustworthy, transparent, and accountable.
All right, thank you. Well, that was a great opening session. Thank you very much. We're going to pick up on a lot of these concepts after the break. I'm just going to check in with the Master of Ceremonies on the timing we want people back after break. I know we're a couple minutes over. Jason, when would you like everyone back? 10:55, okay. Enjoy, there's some sweets and treats, mix and mingle, and we'll see you back at 10:55. Thanks, everybody. All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a chance to grab a refreshment and mingle and get a chance to chat. It sure looked like it. So we're going to get back underway here for round 2. Just a reminder, I know we've been seeing some questions come in. Please keep your questions coming in, particularly for those online, to privacyday@ipc.on.ca. And of course, here in the room, we'll be walking around with a mic. So have your questions ready for the Q&A session. So now, let's jump right in from where we left off into the second half of our event today. I'm going to start with Stephen and Colin. We're going to be pairing people up for this round of questions. What problems have we already solved, and which ones will we be able to solve in the near future with modern and developing AI technologies, including generative AI? That's the first question. Second part, how can we keep public support on side so they feel comfortable embracing these innovations without fear for their safety and without feeling like they have to sign their rights away or giving something up of themselves? Does public trust vary if these innovative endeavors are being led by the public or private sector? So picking up on a couple themes from the morning session. Over to you. We're going to start with Stephen. Yeah.
Great. Well, in terms of problems that are being solved, I won't say have been solved, but issues that are actively being addressed. I mean, for me, one of the very exciting elements in AI is how it can advance all of research. So AI in the service of research is an extraordinary opportunity, which is already coming into play. Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, recently invested in a nonprofit focused on building an artificial intelligence-powered assistant for the laboratory, and his lofty goal is overhauling the entire scientific research edifice. And we're seeing that happening here in Canada as well. A great example is one of our Canada CFAR AI chairs, Alain Asperou-Guzik, who's at U of T. He's advancing strategies for self-driving labs that will harness AI for molecular and materials discovery. And it's just extraordinary, the opportunity there. We've already seen this happening. You think of AlphaFold out of DeepMind and what that means for drug discovery, potentially, and other forms of therapeutics. Climate change is another area where massive data is required to address significant, indeed existential issues. Again, here's an example. One of our other Canada CFAR chairs, David Rolnick, who's in Mila in Montreal, is right now, as we speak, in Central America, running a study that tracks the biodiversity of flying insects. Would have been impossible without AI. We're finding more and more of our chairs are working on questions of energy, chemicals within the energy grid, water treatment plants. I could go on and on and on. We have weather tracking balloons, satellites that are capturing complex weather data that can now be processed in ways that were simply impossible before artificial intelligence. One of the toughest areas, of course, is unstructured data, physicians' handwriting, for example. But even there, we're starting to make progress on the possibility of collecting all of that data, scripts that are written, and figuring out what the implications are for opioids, for example, and the opioid crisis. How can we keep the public on side? Well, there's absolutely a need for public sector regulation, no question in that. The complexity of it is what is interesting to me, as I hinted at the end of the last session. I am not convinced, frankly, that national level regulation will be at all enough, or even provincial level regulation. And yet I also think it's going to be almost impossible to get global level regulation. So I do wonder, frankly, whether some of our, and I've met some of them, the CEOs of big tech flying around arguing that there has to be a global compact around AI. Is that really a cynical exercise? Because it's not likely to happen. I'll just put that out as an observation. So what does that mean? I think what it means is the importance of what you might call regulatory coalitions. Thinking about what's happened in Europe, what's happening in Australia, what's happening in a number of other jurisdictions, and trying to figure out how to make the regulatory frameworks as compatible as possible so we don't have a regulatory reach for the bottom, but we have the possibility of effective regulation across jurisdictions. I also want to emphasize that I think it's really important that because this is so fast moving, we want to make sure, and I think Patricia mentioned this, the commissioner, at the outset, we want to make sure that the regulatory frameworks are flexible so that we don't stifle innovation and create barriers to our own success as a country in relation to all of the other regulatory frameworks. But that's, easier said than done. I'm not saying that's an easy process. I think it's going to be very complicated. But I think if we don't succeed there, then we will lose public trust if we don't do enough, but we will also lose the potential for creativity and opportunity for Canada and Ontario if we don't do it in the right way.
And I'm building on some of the observations that Stephen just made. I definitely think that we are seeing consequential and transformative innovation as a result of generative AI day to day in the sort of examples that Stephen highlighted, which is the focused application of a specific scientific question to a problem, whether it's climate change or specific medical conditions, and then using limited data sets informed by a broad set of expert and experienced interveners to test the data set and the outcomes to verify models so that you have reliable results on decisions that will fundamentally impact the lives of individual or thousands of patients. And that is part of the distinction when you talk about the implementation of this technology, because we now have an advance in computer science and an advance in hardware that allows these transformational assessments of, in some cases, conditions that were poorly understood and poorly treated up until 5 or 6 years ago or even this week. The reality, though, when we talk about trust of citizens and trust of users, in the context of a government using this technology in delivering services and programs, is much of the public perception around generative AI is formed around their personal experience. And that's either experimentation with the current popular models that are easily accessible that produce sometimes irrelevant, sometimes incorrect, and sometimes poisoned answers on the straightforward questions that we as individuals pose and already understand the outcome. So we know that it produces bad results. But then we also see examples of issues that are front and center, particularly in a modern democratic society, around disinformation, around increasingly sophisticated deepfakes, whether of voice, image, whatever. And we have real questions about how do you determine the authenticity, how do you determine the veracity, and then the accountability for how that was generated. Part of the struggle, as Stephen was highlighting, is that for many of these models, many of these companies, they operate out of the United States that has a particular approach and definition of personal rights, including freedom of expression. And there's a framework there that's applied rather generally that often doesn't align to Canadian perceptions of either expression or personal or corporate accountability, particularly in the context of a democratic society, which is where some of the most painful conversation around generative AI and its direct impact on how our society operates and decisions are made at the highest levels, that doesn't seem to have a clear resolution and moves by precedent and court case and challenge from privacy commissioners and information commissioners and human rights commissioners that makes it a painful integration process. I will say that when I looked at this question, part of the innovation that's going to come from it is we now have the computer science tools available to us. We also have incredibly more efficient hardware. But the reality is that this still needs to be processed on very, very large computing platforms. And it's forcing innovation in that technology. And simply by inference as well as implication, that requires advances in the energy efficiency, water consumption, the use of these resources and the availability of resources, as we mentioned just before the break, across a wide range of constituents and stakeholders, not just large companies that have access to data centers or well-funded companies that can buy access to these data centers and these chipsets. There has to be a concerted and strategic effort, I would say at every provincial and federal level of government, to funding access to dedicated resources, not just for technological innovation from the private sector, but sponsored and focused innovation on specific government priorities, whether it's in healthcare or other areas.
All right, thank you, Stephen and Colin. And an interesting sort of space there from, as you said, Stephen, leveraging AI to address existential threats. And as you pointed out, Colin, the entry point for people is more around generative AI, ChatGPT, and there's a lot happening in this space which is causing maybe a bit of confusion. So I'm going to hand it over to Melissa and Chris for the next question. One big worry for many Ontarians is that their data, once collected, might be misused or lost in a data breach. We also know that AI systems often require vast amounts of data to work, yet we're often in the dark about where the data came from, how it'll be used downstream, potentially without our knowledge, or most likely without our knowledge, once it becomes someone else's data or in the AI machine, so to speak. With this in mind, how might the benefits of AI technologies be realized without risking the privacy and security of Ontarians' personal information?
Sure. So this is, I think there's a whole lot of different components to this. And so Melissa and I are going to speak to sort of slightly different levels of response to it. So I'm going to take a little bit of a broader approach if you're an organization or party that's thinking about using AI. So I think the first bit is you need to actually figure a strategic approach to the way that AI technology is going to be used. And that'll be attached to your data strategy. What data do you have? What AI systems are you using? Why are you using them? Do you have a proper retention rate? How have you analyzed data, and so forth? And that's just really fact-finding. How does an organization actually operate? And then how does what you're already doing integrate with an organizational vision or mission? And then for a strategic approach to the use of AI, do you need a new or slightly tweaked vision or strategy? Or is what you have fit for purpose? So I think step one is actually just a fact-finding process, which is intensive, extensive, and should be communicated publicly so that the public knows what's going on. Attached to that, Ontario organizations have specificities to Ontario. And any vision or strategy should be reflective of it, but with an important caveat, that it should be ideally aligned with best practices at the national and international level so that that strategy survives reality. The world is moving around Ontario, and the idea that the Ontario government or any other organization can just do it on their own is a bold assertion and one that may not be successful when it meets reality. So you've got a high-level strategy, a vision, you've documented your assets. Then on an AI front in particular, I think is moving to develop a series of principles that are appropriate for the organization and the expected uses you have both today and in the future. As an example of this, as the commissioner noted in her comments, the IPC and the Ontario Human Rights Commission have gone through and developed a series of high-level principles that are intended to guide our interactions with regulated entities. And just to remind you, so first, the AI systems actually have to work. They have to provide valid and reliable outputs, which is sometimes forgotten, but we think is pretty important as a first step. The stuff has to work. But above and beyond that, it should be safe first and foremost. You know, to put it in comparison, we don't want to drive over low-risk bridges. We want to drive over safe bridges. And I think the same thing when it comes to our technology. Safe technology should be the priority. These technologies should integrate privacy protective practices. They should be transparent to both users and those to whom these tools are affect. There should be accountability regimes that are put in place. And critically, they should be human rights affirming. And that's a strong variance from the idea that they should minimally impede human rights. We actually have come out and said, no, it should be the opposite way. These should be, first and foremost, safe and affirming. Now, once you've got that as an organization, it then guides your subsequent work, both practical policy and other venues. And certainly at the IPC, that's something that we have taken quite seriously, and it guides the way that we engage with external stakeholders, how we influence parties, or not influence, how we engage in consultations with groups, and provides a degree of clarity to other folks as to what you can expect of an organization. Now, if you're actually involved in the day-to-day building of these tools, again, this should always be transparent so you can build trust in the public. They can see what you're doing, consultations with public, so they can say if they want something a little bit different. And ultimately, then you have to actually staff up and maintain it and recognize that you may have to pivot quickly and explain why you're doing so, up to and including taking certain services out of use when an issue is discovered. That's the way that you build public trust, by showcasing here's how they work, here's why they work, and recognizing that if there's a problem, we're going to address it. And that isn't just accepting risk in some cases. It can actually involve, we're not going to use this for the ongoing basis because it is no longer fit for purpose.
Thanks, Chris. And building on what you've said there, I think to start, just want to acknowledge the importance and priority for Ontario in protecting personal information and privacy and ensuring that there is security in terms of online interaction. So really, really top of mind. And thinking back to my opening comments around, excuse me, around risk, And I know I spoke pretty high level in terms of potential risks, but also want to acknowledge that risks are at all stages of the life cycle in using AI and thinking about the inputs. And we've heard some discussion this morning around quality of data and data governance and data stewardship being critical, the foundation of that information that is potentially fueling artificial intelligence, and thinking about how personal information plays a role in that as well, in addition to the outputs and the potential risks and harms in terms of what and how those outputs might be used. So obviously risks include surveillance, bias, discrimination. So we've already covered some of those risks, and where I would want to focus, in addition to the 3 priorities that I spoke to earlier for the trustworthy AI framework, which I'll just repeat because I think I said one of them twice earlier. AI that all people can trust, AI that serves all people, and no AI in secret. So those are the 3 strategic priorities for the trustworthy AI framework. In addition to that, we've been working on beta principles that would support the ethical use of AI. And so that builds on what Chris just said in terms of the principles that have been established with the IPC and the OHRC. Ontario Human Rights Commission. Our 6 principles are complementary to the Canadian federal principles and are based on best practices, and just wanted to give a high-level overview because they're critical really in terms of articulating the ethical considerations and values that we are proposing is considered when looking at use of government technology such as AI, particularly in the delivery of programs and services. So the first one is transparent and explainable. I think we've had a bit of discussion on that this morning, but really ensuring that there is clear disclosure, transparent use, so that individuals understand when AI is being used, they can discuss the outputs, the impacts, and challenge them, and then ideally look to improve them. The second principle is good and fair. Really, this is aligning with our democratic values, ensuring that we're respecting human rights and civil liberties. The third principle is safe. A lot of discussion around safeguards. The Trustworthy AI Framework is taking a risk-based mitigation approach. So really looking at defining what are those risks, continuing to assess and reassess them. Risk assessment is not a one-time exercise. It should be something that's considered through the life cycle of the use of artificial intelligence. So really, that principle speaks to the importance of it being an ongoing process. The fourth principle is accountable and responsible, and this is really ensuring that there's human oversight and accountability, that people are held accountable to the use of artificial intelligence, and that it is not done independently, that there is human review. The fifth principle is human-centric, and this is really just being able to articulate what is a public benefit? Why is AI being used in this specific case? And the last principle is sensible and appropriate. And this is just understanding what are the specific considerations in the specific context in which AI is being proposed to use and be used, and then thinking about the broader implications in the broader context. So really just highlighting that these principles are meant to harmonize with known standards and tools and to try to support innovation, but at the same time identifying those risks and making sure that we're mitigating those risks, including protecting personal information and privacy and security.
Great. No, thanks, Melissa. Obviously, fantastic work being done in Ontario, and some real practical guidance from Chris as well. Kind of linking the last 2 together, you know, Stephen, you talked about a coalition, regulatory coalition, guidance and principles and sort of frameworks, and I think that leads us into another bit of an interesting space for Teresa and Jenny, which is around communities and groups in AI. So privacy laws generally revolve around individuals' rights to protection of their own personal information, and yet AI can have significant implications for the privacy of groups and communities. Also, we know AI has more far-reaching implications beyond privacy rights, which we've touched on today, and can adversely affect other human rights through its potential discriminatory impacts. How do we make sure we are not staying boxed in by those conventional legal frameworks and thinking more broadly and flexibly about how AI should be appropriately governed?
All right, so I have an exercise for you. You can do it now, you can do it later. You can not do it at all. If you're at home, you're on a computer already, so it's easy. If you're here, you may have a handheld device. But just go into a browser and enter Environics Prism, P-R-I-Z-M, and then click on a link to Prism postal code lookup demo. So that's Environics Prism, P-R-I-Z-M, and then the postal code lookup demo. And what that will give you, you put in your postal code, and you'll get a profile of a geodemographic profile of yourself, okay? And this really is at the root of what the concept of group privacy is. We have privacy laws that are really based on the individual and the collection, use, and disclosure of personal information from the individual with the individual's consent in many cases and exceptions to that consent. So they're really consent-based frameworks, and they're about the individual and their data. And what I'm showing you online is a very simple geodemographic profile, which has nothing to do with your personal data or your consent to that personal data, but it's how you have been profiled based on publicly available data sources, on geodemographic statistics, on other inferences that are drawn in relation to that postal code, and that postal code is then linked back to you. And that will then drive decisions that are made about what kind of advertising, it's a very simple one, what kind of advertising you're going to receive. It may not be accurate. Maybe you're living in your parents' basement and it's a great profile of them, but not you, because if it was a profile of you, you wouldn't be living in their basement. But that doesn't really matter. And these kinds of profiles are the kinds of things that we see increasingly with AI, and they're not always just as simple as geodemographic profiles, and they can be profiles built around particular vulnerabilities, medical conditions, tendencies, insecurities. And then they can be used to drive decision-making, whether that decision-making is to target you for advertising, or whether it is to determine whether you're a good credit risk, or whether you're likely to be a good tenant in an apartment building. And they're challenging both from a privacy point of view, because they're not necessarily, or largely not based on your personal data. They're also challenging from a human rights point of view, because of the way in which you're profiled may not fit into easily or obviously into the prohibited categories of discrimination, and yet they may impact or affect you based on personal vulnerabilities. And so this is one of the challenges of privacy, that in the AI context, decisions may be made about us, we may be profiled or characterized, these things will have an impact on us as individuals, and yet they're not happening in a way that is typically governed by data protection laws or privacy statutes, or even necessarily human rights laws. And so that's the group privacy idea, that you may be assigned to ad hoc groups or linked with ad hoc groups that affect how you're treated, and you have relatively little control over that. And so one of the challenges is, how do we address that in privacy legislation? Using the tools that we have, how do we address it in human rights legislation? How do we address it more broadly in AI governance? And collective privacy, just briefly, is a little bit different, and we see that with, for example, the Indigenous Data Sovereignty movement, and other movements as well. It's the idea that idea of groups or communities that are self-defining and self-determining, attempting to take control over the data that is used to the data about them, and to direct how that data will be used to benefit them and used in their interest. And that too is really important in this context, and we're starting to see not just Indigenous data sovereignty, but we're seeing other groups and communities, for example, in Ontario, the Black Health Equity Working Group, looking at how to exercise some sort of collective sovereignty or autonomy over data about that group or community that may be used about that group or community, and that should be used only with their engagement and with their more collective consent. So that's just kind of high level those concepts, and I think I'll turn it over to Jenny to dig in deeper. So I've set out the problem, she's going to solve it for us.
Thanks, Teresa. Nice setup. I'll just add a bit to what Teresa's outlined there around the use there of, say, anonymized and aggregate data. The other big gap is that we can also be affected by data and AI systems that are using completely non-personal data that was never personal to start with. So sensor readings, for example, or if you think about the way in which Wikipedia content is created by content authors, right? That you don't have personal data embedded in that, but it nevertheless, the people who are editing and authoring Wikipedia content feel some ownership over that over that information, and some need to have control over the way in which it is used. There are a couple of other things that make this more collective way of thinking about our response to data and AI really important. The second one I'll point out is around the different kinds of impacts that data and AI systems can have, because it's not just on privacy. We've already talked about impacts on equality, on our quality of our democracy, on competition. We've already talked a bit about energy consumption, right, and the kinds of ways in which apparently for some models, a generation of even just one image can take as much power as charging your phone. These are huge environmental impacts from the use of these kinds of technologies. So we need to have an eye on the broader impacts rather than just on individual privacy. And then the final kind of thing that is a problem with our conventional frameworks based on individuals and personal data and privacy is that individualization, that need to give individuals control and have them the people who are giving consent actually makes it very difficult for us to gang together and have collective action and challenge the kind of power that organizations that are deploying these kinds of systems and developing these kinds of systems have. And so more collective responses from a collective action point of view are really required in order to be able to match the power of the big AI companies or the governments when governments are deploying AI. And so what it means is that we, I believe, need a whole set of other kinds of group rights that enable us to collectively work together. We need proper collective representation, the ability of organizations to kind of bring class action type of redress mechanisms into play. We need also to be able to require organizations to consult with and engage with the communities who are affected by these technologies in their impact assessment processes, but also in the full kind of life cycle of the development and deployment of them, so that there can be that other voice in the room, and that we're not leaning on a mechanism which really is out of this individual consent mechanism, which is really out of step with what we need in the way in which modern data processing and AI systems work.
Yeah, no, this is a fascinating topic. Community rights, community access, and building on what you said, Jenny, community power to be engaged in a different way with a different voice. Yeah, fascinating. And I am aware of some of the work in particular groups, Indigenous or within the Black community, looking to bring together a different way of looking at their space, their rights, their approach to try to drive different results and different conversations, to your point, Teresa. Thank you. Excellent. I did say we were going to come back to this, Melissa, so the moment is here. This is to Melissa and Teresa. As we've heard in Ontario government's consultation on the Ontario Trustworthy AI Framework, there are 3 high-level draft commitments. We won't be tested at the end on these.
You might.
You might, well, actually, we might. One of which is no AI in secret. This means the use of artificial intelligence by the government should always be transparent, with people knowing when, why, and how it is used. So the question, what could government being transparent about its use of artificial intelligence look like in practice?
We didn't talk about who would go first.
That's okay.
Yeah, oh sure, I can jump in. So spoke a bit already about transparency and disclosure, and I wanted to take a bit of a different angle because I haven't spoken about openness, and it was something that Jenny touched on earlier in terms of those 2 facets being critical. And so I think when we talk about no AI in secret, it means both that transparency and explainability, but also the openness. And so one of the components that we're working on as part of the Trustworthy AI Framework is publishing government use of AI as part of our open data catalog. So in terms of our openness, we have demonstrated quite a number of open data sets that we've published on ontario.ca, which is our website, so a plug for that. And I think as leaders in being transparent about data, this paves the way for us to be transparent about our use of AI as well. So I've got a couple stats here. We currently have just over 1,000 open data sets that are available to the public. In last year, in 2023, we had over 700,000 visits to our site. And over 200,000 data sets that were downloaded. So we know that there is access and use to go in and to look at what data sets we're publishing. And we do have some artificial intelligence uses published on ontario.ca Open Data Catalog. Just wanted to highlight some of the examples to give you a sense of how AI technology is currently being used, and it really is a broad range of uses. So I think there was an example earlier around extracting large amounts of data. That's one use in terms of clause and table extraction. So looking at labor agreements, extracting data to determine trends and to efficiently serve clients. Chatbots and virtual assistants is another use of AI technology. So that's really the automated assistance to help serve others, to navigate resources, to access information. And then another innovative use of AI has been predictive soil mapping. And that's modeling used to predict soil properties, to update soil maps, and determine agricultural capability efficiently. So I think, one of the components of being having no AI in secret is really that openness and publishing our uses. And we also have a specific website dedicated to our trustworthy artificial intelligence framework. So that's available on ontario.ca. We're publishing updates. That's where you'll find the principles that I spoke to if you're looking to read them in more detail, as well as the 3 priorities. And our AI expert working group membership is there as well. So I think I'll pause there and maybe pass it to Teresa.
Okay. So I think when I think about what transparency means in relation to AI, I think there's a number of different types of or levels of transparency. So one of them is in transparency in the decision-making process at the adoption stage. So a government is thinking about adopting AI for a particular purpose or a particular context. So what does transparency look like at that stage? What kind of public engagement is there? What kind of public notice is there about AI being considered in that particular context? Is there public engagement on the transparency on the implementation plans? So what kind of transparency is being provided about things before they're put in place? And that's one level. Another is the kind of in-the-moment transparency. So this is, these are, we're starting to see emerge these transparency obligations around when you're actually dealing with a bot, that you get to know that the agent you're engaging with is a machine and not a human being, and so you get a notice in the moment. Or maybe you're applying for something and it's going to be an automated decision, and you get a notice that the decision is going to be rendered using an automated decision system. So that's transparency in the moment. So you, as a human interacting with government or with the system or with a chatbot, you know that you're dealing with AI. There's also the kind of transparency that comes from a right to an explanation. So a decision has been rendered using AI, for example, and you have some sort of right to an explanation of how that decision was arrived at. So, and depending on the nature of the right to an explanation, it may be relatively limited, but it is at least you get to know perhaps the parameters of the decision or the key factors or indicators of the decision or what kind of data was used in making the decision. But there's a certain level of transparency with a right to an explanation. There's also the issue of transparency of the system itself. Is it an open system? Is it open access software? Is it open data? How do you know how the system operates or works? And is it proprietary and closed? Is it not necessarily proprietary, but still relatively obscure in its functioning, perhaps even to the developers? So there's that transparency level around how you get to know how those decisions were made. And then there's a broader level of transparency, which is, of course, very interesting to researchers and civil society groups and so on, which is that there be some form of AI registry, that there be kind of public transparency about the different types of AI systems that are being used by government, for example, and the context in which they're being used, so that it's easier to find out just how widespread the AI use is within the public sector and in what kinds of applications And this kind of transparency can also include transparency around algorithmic impact assessments, any reports on the functioning of the systems, and those sorts of things. And this is the kind of information that can be really useful, as I said, to researchers and to civil society groups. So there's lots of different types of transparency, and I think all of those are tremendously important.
Yeah, thanks you both. That's some really good and practical and implementable advice of the moment. So thank you. I'm going to shift a bit now to Stephen and Jenny. If we think about AI being used for the public good, we do see individuals and organizations justifying their actions in highly subjective terms or without strong evidence, sometimes falling into the trap of noble cause bias. Researchers believing their work will ultimately help others, entrepreneurs setting out to make life easier, more convenient for people, large multinationals, wanting to act as good corporate citizens and wanting to do so with the right intentions. However, without maybe being able to relay or justify that, it's maybe a bit the ends justifying the means, particularly when we talk about a new and rapidly advancing technology. So questions to the two of you. How can we assess the intended public good in more objective terms? And what criteria should we be using? Who should be responsible for making those decisions in the pursuit of a better society? And what boundaries should not be crossed regardless of the benefits?
Jenny, would you like to go first?
Sure, happy to. Thank you. So this I thought was a really interesting question because, framed in terms of how can we assess public good in objective terms, I think is actually quite a dangerous path to go down. Public good, by its definition, from my point of view, is a political and contested space. It's not possible to get an objective answer on what the public good is. And if you start trying to, put numbers behind the way in which the kind of benefits and risks around AI, then we go down a quite utilitarian road that I think could be actually quite problematic in the long term. When we look at whether a particular, when we're asking about public good, we're really asking about, is this particular use of data and AI okay, according to a general kind of public will? And looking at public attitudes, kind of surveys and deliberations and participation exercises, what really comes out is that the answer to those questions is extremely nuanced and extremely dependent on the context and detail about the particular use of data or AI. So it depends on, what data is collected, how exactly it's being used. It depends on the community that is being affected, their cultural and political backstory about colonization, about systemic racism, about victimization and persecution. All of these things play into whether a particular community that's affected by a data and AI system view this proposed use as being to public good. And they also have really nuanced answers in terms of, it's okay to use data and AI for this kind of purpose, as long as these other conditions are met, as long as there are checks and balances around them. So you get to this place where the kind of is it okay questions need to be decided at quite a low specific level, rather than, I think, having these big kind of red lines that everybody can put stuff around. And that's what's led me and others who are working around this space to really focus on the role of public participation and deliberation at every level of the AI and data governance kind of story, because it's through those participatory exercises, through deliberation with a range of representative members with the public, that you can get to a agreed position that reflects nuances and that also provides a bit of a democratic mandate and legitimacy to the kinds of decisions to the direction in which you're going with data and AI systems. What that looks like is different in different places. So it can be public or patient participants in panels that are making operational decisions about the sharing of health data, for example. Or it might be running a big deliberation exercise to come out with higher level guidelines about how health data should be collected or used or shared. Or it might be having democratic representatives debating in Parliament about laws around, whether we can put in place now emergency measures in the pandemic around access to particular data in this particular context. Or it can be at those big multinational kind of conversations, like we Connected by Data ran during the AI Safety Summit in the UK over here, a people's panel on AI alongside that safety summit to get some of those real people's voices into the conversation to kind of indicate what real people thought was the public good and not just those that were invited to the high level kinds of discussions. So I think we need to really focus as we're looking at how do we define public good. We need to focus on the process through which we get there, and that process involves public participation, public deliberation at every single level, and with lots of different kinds of techniques.
I will come back to where Jenny just ended, but I think just to step back for a moment, one of the things that needs to be said is, of course, every new technology brings this potential for noble cause bias. This is not a phenomenon of AI. I sat on boards of international development organizations, and they were replete with examples of technology that was being transferred that turns out to be inappropriate, not considered for the context. To Jenny's point, computers that were sitting on desks of government officials in Jamaica that I visited because the system just didn't function. There was no one to repair it, and the Canadian government had spent millions of dollars in providing that system. So this is not a new problem. What's different probably for the AI phenomenon is that potentially everyone is engaged. It's not sort of small segments of the population being served. It's everyone. And so I do want to step back and say AI literacy becomes really quite an important concept here. And there are many aspects of that. Just to be very concrete, on the CFAR website, we have something called Destination AI, which is a publicly available AI literacy tool targeted at people at many different levels. It might be worth taking a look at that. I would also expect that we're going to have to be thinking about our education system and figuring out how we help younger folks, students, actually begin to process basic AI literacy so that they can make more informed judgments and contribute more effectively ultimately in the kind of processes that Jenny's talking about. Especially around disinformation and the potential uses in electoral campaigns, et cetera. I mean, this is really a fundamental democratic challenge. But to get back to where Jenny ended, I suggest that everything she said we have to be considering. And there are some Canadian examples. I'll just give you one. There's a guy named Taylor Owen, a researcher at the Max Bell School at McGill, who's really done a lot of work on the interface of new technologies and human engagement, public deliberation processes, et cetera. It'd be worth taking a look at the materials on the Max Bell website there. He recently spoke at a CFAR forum on generative AI on the importance of bringing citizens into regulatory conversations, for example, through the use of citizens' assemblies like the ones that Jenny was referring to. So I think that's all absolutely crucial. Two other points. Critical that there's a diversity of voices being brought into this dialogue, however we create it. And that also means into the creation processes of AI. And here we have so many examples that have already been referred to where, for example, bias has crept into systems because we did not have diverse voices participating in the creation. There's a wonderful example, I won't go into detail, but there's a Canadian-born computer scientist, Joy Bulamwini, who was at MIT, famous story, working on an art project on AI for facial recognition. And she discovered in that process that her own face was not recognized as a black woman in the system. And that meant that there had been cameras, facial recognition systems deployed in the market for years that were systematically malfunctioning effectively because they didn't work for black people, and particularly black women. That tells you that the teams that created these systems were utterly unrepresentative. And that's, I think, to help generate widespread public confidence, we have to address that creation aspect as well. So there are real harms that can take place. The public is not without reason in challenging the evolution, and the kinds of systems for deliberation that were mentioned by Jenny, I think, are absolutely central going forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and thank you for Stephen flagging, the focus on children and youth. I know it's a priority for us at the IPC, and as we move into these spaces, looking at our education system so that folks are uniquely equipped and ready for what's to come. And Jenny, thank you for challenging the objectiveness and reminding us that consultation is messy, and it's something we need to embrace and embrace in different ways, so really appreciate that. I have our penultimate question. I've wanted to say penultimate my entire life in a public setting. It goes to Chris and Colin. Generative AI is a subset of machine learning in which systems are trained on massive information sets, often including personal information. That responds to a user prompt, we were talking about that earlier, to generate new content that's never existed before. This can be in the form of text, such as summaries or analyses, computer code, images, video, audio, etc. So in simple terms, how is this different than a normal Google search, some of the tools we're used to? What are some of the unique risks to privacy and other rights posed by generative AI in particular, and what are some of the legal and ethical safeguards to help ensure it is developed, provided, and used in a safe, privacy-protective, and transparent manner that fosters public trust?
Right. Well, I will let Colin talk about the Google search because I feel that I will wade into something and say something incorrect. But what I can talk really at a high level is how generative AI technologies work. So there's some parallels, frankly, to a lot of AI systems. They require immense amounts of data. Now, generative AI requires sort of an exponential amount more, but we're still talking about huge, huge volumes of personal information as well as other data. Now, what's unique about a generative AI technology is it looks at that data and it breaks it down into sort of molecular components or tokens. And then it goes and assesses what exactly are the structures or the patterns or the statistical correlations between all of those molecules and elements of data. So when you're running a query, say you're using ChatGPT or DALL-E or any of the other tools, what you're really running is a statistical query. With this prompt, what is the possibility of the next element of the picture, the next element of the sentence? When you're putting a PDF in and you're getting the summary, what is the next likely part of the statistical output of it? So that's why every time you use these tools, you can keep saying, produce me an image of a black cat in a blue house running over a fish, and every time you'll get a different image. And that's because the way these systems work is, one, we don't fully understand all of the way they work, and second, you get that different statistical output based on the way the neurons fired. Now, the biggest companies and model developers are aware of some of the legal and ethical challenges, and we're seeing them attempt to mitigate it. So you do, in some cases, have the ability to try and extract some of the personal information that may have made its way into these models. The individuals never explicitly consented to have drawn into them, or alternately may have no idea it's publicly available on the internet in the first place. So what have the companies done? They've built in safety checks. So when a news story breaks, if you insert this prompt into the models, they usually try and close that off pretty quickly. So if you're using tools from the biggest companies, a lot of the stuff that worked 6 weeks ago doesn't work today. But nonetheless, you're still going to have bias in the underlying molecular bits of the data and the statistics. And so what does that mean? It means that, as one story from a few months ago may not work as well today, there may be a safety system that's been put in place, but if you went to many of the image generators and you put in something such as create an image of a white person cutting a black person's hair in the 1960s in an advertisement, you couldn't get it. None of the generative systems would output it, and that is because of an underlying bias in the statistics of those molecules. Now, the big companies have these safety systems, but there's a nefarious side to it as well. And the nefarious side is many of the less regulated systems, the open systems, those are a wild west. And you can get them to do all sorts of horrific and horrible things, up to and inclusive of the generation of synthetic child pornography. Now, what exactly can you do if you want to be responsible, if you want to maintain the public trust in how these tools can be used? There's a lot, and I won't go into all of it because I don't have a full speech. But what I would highly recommend people to do, whether you're an organization developing these tools or whether you're one that's using them, is to go and look at what the commissioner mentioned previously. The Canadian Privacy Commissioners published the Principles for the Responsible Development and Use of Generative AI. And that gives you a really good guidepost of what you should do. And I think if you integrate that seriously into the way that these tools are either developed or used, you're going to be on a very strong path to building a privacy protective system, and being able to demonstrate that you're substantively doing that can be used to showcase to the public, here's what we're doing to maintain and generate that public trust.
Looking at this from the perspective of a user in a general consumer application or in the implementation of this latest generation of AI in a modern government context, the real conflict we find, that many of the people in this room find, is that the mechanisms we have for informing and giving users a modicum of control about their experience is based on individual awareness of the collection and use of data. And particularly in a North American context, that's often simply information. It's not actually a level of control. Or if you do actually have a moment of inspiration, and try to dig into the complex information notices and options panels that any large company offers, like Environics and Google and everyone, you discover that some elements can be, you can suggest corrections, you can actually direct corrections or direct removal. And as as many of our panelists have actually mentioned, that collective control of data and the expression of collective control of data is what's missing when we talk about the implementation of generative AI, especially in today's most popular versions. Because the examples that we see that are helping us as individuals assess both the authority and veracity, and then also the trustworthiness of these tools, is based around the exposure of individual information from very large data sets that were collected rather haphazardly and very rapidly to try and build these molecules in as great a corpus as possible. And there's no way to actually surface whether your information has been collected or possibly could be exposed, because again, the way this mechanism works, it's temporary. Your information, either whether it's de-identified or it's anonymized or it's actually very personal, could exist within a data set until a very specific prompt that only happens once and never happens again. And that is the distinction with the search mechanisms that we're used to, because the search mechanisms that we're used to, in effect, work like an informed librarian or work like a particularly effective retail clerk at a big box store. They know where the reference sources are, and they know how to point you to them. And if they've been there long enough, they can also point out the associated elements that are relevant to your search and the elements that are irrelevant. When the reality now is that we're in an information economy around these most popular implementations of generative AI, that we're back to the model of the 80s, where you have a cousin that pretends to know everything, or a teacher that has 40 years experience in the subject, and you're simply taking a trust that you ask a question and the answer is 100% correct, and you live the rest of your life not realizing that, in fact, it was a misapplication of knowledge or an absence of knowledge. And that is the real challenge here on a national and global level, which is, what is that framework? And that's the push and pull between the developers and the regulators, because I think quite accurately, people that are working on this science and this technology want to have the space to do the really interesting work that has a direct impact on very, very difficult questions. And that requires access to data, processing power, and then informed insight into specific questions and testing the outcome. And they need that so that they can have need an environment that encourages, we use the word innovation in a very broad sense, but that incorporates risk-taking. That incorporates risk-taking on the part of the developers and the companies, organizations, but also on the part of regulators and others who express and represent the collective voice. But we are still in this process where we are trying to understand our individual understanding and authority and the tools we have available as individuals to express our concerns and control over the tools that are increasingly affecting our lives. And there's a very big gap there that creates a real trust problem. And the short-term solution is the authorities like privacy commissioners, maybe even human rights commissioners, newly built AI regulators, have the ability to, one, address that trust component, as Stephen suggested with literacy programs, but also lead a conversation about the transition, including all the stakeholders, from the scientists and technologists to the people working on responsible AI, ethical AI, within companies as well as civil society and government in a very loud and public way so that we can shape this together because the potential is there, but the immediate complications and concerns just seem to be growing for us as individuals.
Yeah, thank you very much, Colin and Chris. I do have to say, Colin, the next time I'm using Bing Chat, I will be picturing my cousin Rob. So, thanks for that. That's gonna. I see the mics are warmed up. We have one more question. It's going to be again a bit of a rapid round around the circle, and then we'll be going out to a Q&A session. So just teeing up folks here and online to be ready with your questions. And we're gonna go a bit full circle, from where the commissioner opened up today's session with the land acknowledgement. We're going to turn back to our Indigenous partners for this last question. In a blog written by Commissioner Kosane, Privacy and Humanity on the Brink, she speaks about the 7th generation principle, which is based on an ancient Haudenosaunee or Iroquois philosophy, that the decisions we make today should result in a sustainable world 7 generations into the future. So from each of you, and I'll start with Melissa, what thoughts do you have when thinking about the broader societal implications of AI and our humanity 7 generations from now?
Rapid fire. So I think key to this really, and really appreciated the blog, so thank you, Commissioner, is that what we do today will have lasting impacts over the long term and will impact future generations. And thinking about how we put in place the right guardrails to ensure there are protections in place for trustworthy AI use in the public sector, it's important that AI is adopted responsibly, that we're accountable, transparent, responsible, and thinking about, we really have to get these policies right, and we need to ensure that they're in place to protect others in the future. So that's my rapid fire answer.
Thank you. Stephen.
2 points. First, we actually have to work to help people who are developing AI understand other worldviews. And I am happy to say that concretely, right now, CFAR is working on, with Indigenous partners to develop a curriculum for young researchers in AI, high school right into university and postdocs, to help them just understand that there are different ways of thinking about knowledge and the world that might be relevant as they consider the development of their own AI tools. Second point is, it's really humbling to actually ask yourself, 7 generations ago, what did our ancestors know about where we are now? And the answer is precious little. And that's going to be true for us too. And that means that I would say we really do have to ourselves constantly be trying to challenge ourselves with different worldviews and experiences, not just assuming that we can identify all the risks and safety concerns ourselves. We really have to be listening to those diverse voices, or we won't have a chance of positioning the 7 generations outward in a sustainable way.
So when I looked at this, first I had to actually figure out how much time we're talking about. Depending on your calculation, this is 170 to 190 years. So it's a very challenging and interesting question. I think at the core element is we need to think very carefully how and why technology is being built and deployed, while taking seriously that many of the technologies that are in our daily life right now are baked in with generations of inequity, unfairness, and discrimination, the way that technologies have been justified, how they've been deployed, and how they operate today. I think it's important that we'll need to keep in mind that technology is a human artifact, and as such, it is baked with our human values. And that it is essential that if we are looking out generationally, that we work at the level of principle and concept and seek to both actively redress the discrimination bias that exists in the data and practices today, and then bring those parties in who have been systemically disempowered historically so that they are at the center of the way these technologies are developed. Only if we do that can we both correct the past and ideally seek a clear line into the future.
Chris and I clearly are of one mind because I did the same thing and started writing a list of what happened 175 years ago. And I'm very excited for this question because I can call upon my economic history work just up the street at the St. George campus. But I think what has characterized the evolution of both mathematics and computer science technology over that time period has been rapid and extremely disruptive development based on the availability both of scientific insight, but also capital investment. And capital investment has therefore driven a focus on consumer impact or impact on specific markets that can reward that capital investment. And that has led to power imbalances both in the conversation about the implementation technology as well as of the regulatory frameworks. Because naturally when there's a power imbalance, you have market actors that can affect the conversation about regulatory oversight. And the distinction we have now in this moment is that the technology is available for collective debate and collective action. But it's very tenuous, and it's been very tenuous since the Arab Spring and in subsequent versions, because it still depends on privately controlled platforms and open availability to privately controlled platforms. And that collective action then has to be interpreted through standard traditional power frameworks and regulatory frameworks. And that connection is incredibly hard because it's still a nascent but incredibly important point. And it's an incredibly important point because it has to bring in, as you said, the communities that have been overlooked or explicitly excluded from this conversation up to this point, and to highlight their perspective. And the dynamic we see today around those communication platforms is a commitment to preserving that access to communication from the platform owners. But the reality of a free market operation and the ebbs and flows of product adoption mean that we see transitions like we are now in terms of our preferred daily social media tool. There's a lot of confusion among communities online about how they develop a collective voice on whether it's Mastodon, Blue Sky, X, something privately held. And that's going to continue to happen, but we are at a point where there's not just acceleration, but there's actual memory and engagement. And there's a commitment from community groups and civil society groups to have a voice beyond the traditional civil society has a role as the guardian of the 1990s perspective on the internet, to reflecting the needs, the desires, and absolutely the concerns of various communities that rely on this technology moving forward. And that's the way you're going to shape a technological environment and alongside it, society, to focus those investments and efforts on positive and constructive outcomes against some of our most serious challenges, like our world-threatening challenges that don't have a 7-generation window. They've got a 2 or 3 generation window. So.
All right, thank you, Colin.
Yeah, so when I thought about this question and I thought about the 7th generation, all I could think was, I'm so sorry. We talk about the need to balance innovation with privacy and with other social values when we work in this space. But I think that kind of catchphrase hides the fact that innovation is not inherently good. And it can cover an awful lot of sins. And while there's a potential to do great good and to make lives better, and we've heard about some of that potential, there's also a great deal of innovation that enables or encourages consumerism, waste, addiction, fraud, abuse, exploitation, misinformation, and the list could go on. And and then there's more innovation that responds to some of those tendencies with surveillance and profiling and with the technologies of warfare. So, seventh generation, what we need to do to get to a seventh generation and to one that we can not feel shame in the face of is to rein in our greed and self-interest, because honestly, I think that that's such a big part of this space, is that as a society, we are so often driven and increasingly driven by greed and self-interest, and we need to turn back to community values and thinking about other people and the broader social good and welfare. And coming out of the pandemic and what we saw then, I just again, I'm so sorry. Sorry, I'm so sorry to all of you too to be a downer, but.
And Jenny.
Thanks. So when I was thinking about this question, I was also thinking 7 generations is a hugely long time when you've got a fast-moving field like data and AI. And I also thought about the book, and I'll put a plug in for it, called Power and Progress, coming out of the MIT Press, which really talks about how to get good outcomes from technological transformations and industrial revolutions. You get good progress, you get a beneficial impact on society overall if you have countervailing forces to the powerful organizations that are deploying those technologies themselves. So, you have unions as well as the factory owners. So I think the key here is that we empower those countervailing forces so that we can create not kind of absolute understanding about this is good and this is bad, but so that we have the agility and adaptability to find our way to that good solution, that we have the right processes and the right institutions that will help us navigate a time that is going to be extremely unpredictable, extremely changeable. And the way that we do that is by empowering those unions, civil society organizations, people who are fighting for consumer rights as an important part of the landscape that is shaping the technologies that are affecting all of our lives.
All right, thank you, Jenny, for those closing thoughts. We're going to slide right into a Q&A session. I'm going to ask Commissioner Kosane to join me on the stage. If we have a question here in the audience, we've got mics walking around. Just put your hand up there at the back. Got a question. Thank you.
Diana Platts, provincial government. The last question, thank you so much, especially my friend across the pond, for reading books, because I'm a boomer and I've read just about every one right now that's going around about AI in sheer self-interest of job preservation as a project manager. But I'm going to ask a question with respect to what you're talking about with the unions, consumerism, and artists, content creation. I'm a member of ACTRA, as well as AMAPSIO, which is the provincial government. And you saw about this strike in the United States with respect to, I don't know if you know, but when you work on a movie, and I have, you get a whole other day's pay to come in and redub your own voice. And that's like, oh, thank God the audio didn't work, because you get 50% more money. So now we have AI, and we're not even sure if we're going to get the first day anymore. So I wonder if you could hum a few bars about future of work, not just day jobs, but content creation with respect to creativity, artists, writers, television, film, etc.
Just Jenny.
Do you want me to take that, Mike?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Jenny, yes.
And I think one of the impact of AI in the workplace is one of the main places that we're going to be encountering it, and already encounter AI, and not just generative AI. But specifically, and I'll keep it short, to your question about artists and empower here, I think that the agreement that was struck in the US is really important in showing the power of unions to push back against the use of generative AI in exploitative ways, because it really is about how the actors who like movie studios, like game developers, who will actually own copyright and be responsible for employing creatives. How they operate with generative AI is going to be the crucial thing that then impacts on really our whole creative field and how that operates. There is a real challenge that we need to address around the kinds of rights that the creators themselves have over the stuff that is created, because one of the challenges, as you'll know, is that often those rights, the intellectual property, but also often some of the performance rights or moral rights, can be signed away and have to be signed away when you work in those kinds of fields. And that is something that we really need to have, again, a kind of proper review of legislation around, because in an era of generative AI, creators themselves need to have rights that cannot be taken away from them, that they always have over their image, over their performances, so that we can secure their work in the longer term.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. Thank you for the question. I have a question online here, maybe more to the regulators in the room. Is Canada or Ontario ready to ban specific uses of AI? For instance, the use of live facial recognition in public spaces, or the use of AI to categorize and infer people's emotions. I know we have Melissa, Teresa, the Commissioner. I'm not sure if any of you want to start the dialogue on that one.
Well, I can jump in. I mean, we can do that, right? Those are things that we can do. We have to make the decision to do them. We have to be willing to do them. And I think, I mean, there has been hesitancy over crafting bans on particular types of AI because, again, of the concern that by having a ban that you may stifle or disrupt innovation that might have useful applications or that might be beneficial. And so I think there's been a reluctance to have bans. On the other hand, we've seen other jurisdictions put in place bans as a precautionary measure because we don't have the governance mechanisms in place, because we don't know how we're going to deal with it, because we recognize that the technology is not yet ready for prime time, that there are still very significant issues with discrimination, for example, with facial recognition, so that there can be all kinds of reasons to maybe not ban outright, but to say, let's not do this now. Let's stop and pause and put the governance in place and be ready for it. So, you know, I think that we are ready. We have different tools, different abilities to do this kind of thing, but we have to be prepared and willing to do it. And we need to have those conversations. And I think it would be good to see those conversations taking place.
Okay, great. Thank you. Oh, yeah, please,
Could
Stephen.
I just add, I mean, Teresa uses the word precaution, and I think it's really an important concept here. I was thinking about it in relation to the seventh generation as well. As many of you will know, in international environmental law, there is something called the precautionary principle, which is really to try to prevent people from moving before they're ready. And I actually think that this is an area where, instead of thinking about banning, you could think about putting in place guardrails, or alternatively, steps that have to be proven before a technology is brought into operation. There are a number of different mechanisms you could think about without going to an outright ban. But I do think that the precautionary principle is valid for regulatory agencies to be thinking about in this context.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. I'm being told we have time for one more question. Oh, you wanted to jump in. Go ahead, Patricia.
I just wanted to chime in and say, I think there are no-go zones that, whether they be the subject of a permanent ban or prohibitive ban or a precautionary principle that requires greater guardrails around. I think we are in a position where we've already seen some nefarious applications. But the advantage of that is tremendous opportunity to engage and re-engage public trust. Because once you get those applications off the table, you open up conversations about, okay, what is the regulatory space of the good uses and opportunities that we want to make of AI? But I do think that on the outskirts, those no-go zones, really do require a strong treatment so that people can feel confident that when they're engaging in these kinds of technologies, they don't have to worry about those really nefarious purposes. And we know that enough to know what a starting list might be, at least.
Thank you, Patricia. Thanks, everyone. I'm being given the signal we're gonna shift to wrap up. I do want to thank the panel for a tremendous discussion today. I was just thinking, this is really the beginning. Well, go ahead. We can clap now. Yeah. Beginning of a great discussion, and if you're interested in what you heard today, please reach out and follow these folks. They have blogs, they have various social media accounts. Please check in with them, and let's keep the dialogue going. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Michael, and thank you to our panel guests for a dynamic and very informative session. I'd also like to thank our in-person audience and those joining us on our webcast for coming up with some great questions, and as well as for our tireless staff in communications and others in the IPC who helped organize today's event. I do hope everyone learned something new and valuable today, and I encourage you to share those insights with your colleagues and others. And if you know someone who was not able to attend today's event, please let them know they will be available on the IPC's YouTube channel in the next few days. So when discussing the bleeding edge of AI technology and privacy, you're bound to hear some sharp insights, and we certainly did that and heard that this morning. Normally I'd like to conclude this with a few takeaways and a roundup, but I'm sure there's some sort of AI technology that can help you do that in the meantime. So in the interest of time, I do just want to note, though, that it was, besides being a great panel discussion, I do want to note that from the Commissioner's earlier point, when it comes to use of AI in public sector, Ontario, we believe, is off to a good start. But there's certainly a lot of work to be done to ensure the public sector uses AI in a way that's beneficial while respecting safety and privacy. As a province, we are in a unique place to forge our own path forward, and we have an opportunity to lead by example in supporting and conducting research that examines the effects of AI and defines its risks more broadly through a human rights approach. As we move into an era where AI will find its place in our public sector, we must engage more with the public to build their trust in AI, particularly for marginalized groups and communities who stand to be the most impacted by algorithmic decision-making. And most importantly, Ontario should lead by example in how we govern the use of AI in our public sector. We need to strive to provide enhanced delivery of government services and programs in ways that are clear and transparent, and that Ontarians find safe, secure, and ethically responsible. With that, let me finish by encouraging you to visit the IPC's website at ipc.on.ca to take advantage of all the resources we have to offer. And you can also follow us on social media to keep up with the latest developments in access and privacy in Ontario. We're on X, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You can also tune into our award-winning Info Matters podcast for some interesting conversations with people from all walks of life about access and privacy issues. It's available on our website and all the major streaming services. And again, thank you for joining us today, and have a great afternoon.